Bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de Somos Founders Podcast. Les saluda Edgar Navas y pues con este último podcast del año 2021 cerramos la primera temporada de Somos Founders, a nuestro nuevo rebrand. Estamos muy emocionados y pues muchísimas gracias. Hoy le damos la bienvenida a alguien que he tenido ya la fortuna de seguir y he estado esperando este podcast para concluir este primer ciclo. Les damos las gracias a todos ustedes por acompañarnos en estos años desde Latino Founder Hour. Ahora somos founders, pero hoy les quiero presentar a Leni Alvarez desde Veracruz, México, fundadora de ODA, Otros Dreams en Acción. Leni, ¿cómo estás? How you doing?
I'm doing good, and I'm part of the team of ODA.
Oh, team of ODA,
So,
yeah. Yeah, one of the founders of ODA, yeah.
So I can share with you. So ODA, Otros Dreams en Acción, is an organization that is led by and for returnees and deportees in Mexico. It was co-founded originally by an author and investigator, Jill Anderson, junto con Maggie Loredo.
Okay.
And it flourished first as a book, and then turned into Maggie is one of those stories that was part of the book. And then it flourished to be an organization. The book came at a time when nobody was speaking about returnees and deportees in Mexico, and the organization was decided to move on as an organization when Trump was elected, and with that mindset of maybe we're going to be receiving more deportees in Mexico. And I joined La Lucha Se Puede Decir. I'm a returnee myself. And I came upon ODA in 2017. I can share with you a bit further how I came upon ODA. My mom basically saw them on TV. And she's like, Leni, there are people like you on TV talking about what you're talking about. So, yeah.
That's great. No, but and you know, I met you through some of our guests. Marcela Alvarez, co-founder in that time of Hola Code, which was a phenomenal story. Really inspiring. Her work, how she was able to create a startup basically on an incredible pitch. Great organization. She's no longer there. She's moved on to other things. But her mission, is just to do good. It continues. So I'm really super appreciative of Marcela to being able to introduce to wonderful people. Like, she told me a little bit about your story, but I didn't want to just do any spoilers. So I'd rather just defer that to you and so just tell us, where's Leni come? I mean, I know your parents are from Veracruz. You're back in Veracruz, but you were part of that co-founding team at Hola Code as well.
Yes. So I was born in Chiapas, actually. I'm a Southern girl from both countries. So I was born in Chiapas. My family is Chiapas, Oaxaca, Veracruz. I'm currently in Veracruz, which is the state that my parents returned to after we lived undocumented in the United States. So, like I said, my name is Leni Alvarez, born in Chiapas, raised in Florida. So also that's why I mentioned the southern state.
Yeah.
I was raised in Bradenton, Sarasota, Arcadia, Florida. I actually went back after 12 years, as we call it, of exile. I have been fortunate to be that 0.001% of the returned and deported community that actually was able to access a visa. Also, it started to impact a lot of the laws drawn back from 2001 from 9/11. And in the case of my family, specifically in Florida, they were no longer able to obtain license to be able to drive. And that caused my dad to frequently get tickets because of driving without a license. And it got to the point where he would turn himself into jail every Friday and come out every Sunday. At that point, of course, like, my parents couldn't hide what was going on. And they sat us at a table. I come from a mixed status family, so I have two brothers that were born in Florida. And basically, they told us we were not from there. Or trying to understand what that meant of being undocumented. I started to really understand that. I was also, at that time, you would see like Primer Impacto, como that they were doing protests and stuff. The Obama administration was really campaigning for an immigration reform, et cetera, et cetera. And I started to understand that, like, like what they're saying, like I belong to what they're saying. Like I belong in that lucha, no? Still
Yeah.
didn't really understand it was a lucha, but I just knew that that narrative was my narrative. So we left when I was 16. We each have like a year and months between. And
Okay.
we came back to the state of Veracruz. I literally didn't know a lot about Mexico. My mom thought that the best way, and this is something that we talk within our deported and returned community, is it really is your experience is very different from what side of the state of the country you are raised in. So
Really?
yeah, because in California, I've been able to go to California. It's so open to talk about your status, and it's so open to like
Huh.
be able to talk about this diaspora. But in the
Yeah.
South, in Georgia, in Florida, North Carolina, you don't talk about that. It's something
Really?
that's
That
very
is
hush
interesting.
hush.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's something that we really noticed, and I that's a lot of similarities that we're able to find in our stories and how we're able
Interesting.
to like como decir como me entiendes, ¿no?
Right.
Es precisamente how we grew up, and in our sense, we grew up because we didn't know. We grew up
Right.
very assimilated, very feeling part of, not so much of an otherness until
Right.
of course you would face moments of otherness, no? In the case of Maggie, as well, the co-director of all that at this moment, she is director. I can share a bit more as well. In her case, she went to a Taco Bell to apply for her first job, and they asked her for a social security number, and she went back home and they told her, well, you don't have one. And that's a lot of the stories we hear within our community that is raised in certain states. So that's what happened to me
Right.
as well. And well, I didn't really understand what that meant. I didn't believe that we were going to really be coming back until one day I arrived to La Casa after high school. And my mom had a bunch of boxes, and she's like, choose like what's most important for you. We're going to Mexico. And that was in 2009, and now we're in 2021.
Wow. So your parents decided to uproot everybody. It's just like, this is it. We're making this giant decision.
Yeah.
Just like we're just gonna.
Así como no pudimos decir si sí o no queríamos irnos, this time we also didn't have a voice to say if we wanted to stay or come back.
Right.
And in my parents' case, well, my dad finished up, you could say, his time. He did all of his community hours because he wanted to leave the record clean or as much
Right.
as possible if one day he were to want to apply, or I don't know, through his kids or something like that. So that was through the whole process. And as well, the judge told him, like, one more time and you're going to get picked up and deported. Every single
wow.
time that he would go into jail, he says that pues habían otros paisanos next to him, no, in the cell. And you would hear, and now being on the side of working with our community, you hear of ICE going into jails, no?
I'm
And
just
before
picking.
they
Yeah.
Exactly. So my dad was always at that risk. Fortunately,
Wow.
he never got picked up, but he was able to see people from his cell being called out and not coming back, no? And the rumor was, pues vino la migra, no? Vino ICE. So that was always a constant fear as well.
Yeah, no, that's extremely stressful. Beyond, the normal stresses of life, to being able to. Wow, yeah, that's unbelievable. So
Yeah.
your parents picked up. So we're going back to Mexico.
Yeah.
How was your experience coming to a country that you didn't know? I mean, you probably didn't remember. I said you
Yeah.
grew up in the States, just like went to school in the States, primarily speaking English, and yet you have certain bits of the culture, but it's not the same as like all of a sudden you're in. Did you guys go directly to Veracruz, or do you go to a big city? How was the shock, the cultural shock?
So yeah, I didn't remember at that time anything about Mexico. Mexico to me was an idea that had been formed in my head by movies, by bits of pieces that my mom would tell me, and by the news. So you could imagine, as I think a lot of people, it's dangerous, especially at that time. So when we came, just to clarify why maybe I didn't have any memories, was because my mom crossed El Rio in a kiddie pool, actually in an inflatable swimming pool when I was 2 years and a half and my sister was 8 months.
Oh my
So
gosh.
we were very, very small. So we didn't have memories. Everybody asked me, do you remember how you crossed? I don't remember.
No, you were a
and I think
baby.
I'm very
Yeah.
fortunate that I don't, because I also have a lot of friends that still have traumas of knowing and realizing when they were crossing, no? So
Wow.
I guess I'm fortunate that I don't have those memories. And when we came back, we actually came back in car. And as an older sister trying to like help out. Yes, I was always that immigrant family, first daughter or the first kid, whichever it may be, whichever gender. I was trying to be a support system, and in my case, I couldn't really explode on my emotions, but trying to play that narrative that we were going to have fun. It was a road trip. My parents told us that we were going to come back. Things were going to be great. We were going to have a casa, that they had been working for this, that we were going to put a cyber cafe, because that's what was like, you could, estaba hitting, like it was being popular as a business. And I had the idea that I was going to come and die in Mexico. To be the most sincere, I thought I was going to come and die. I thought I was going to see Pancho Villa on a donkey. I know I had such a
Oh my
corrupt
gosh.
image. I know.
You see what Hollywood does to us? Like, oh my gosh.
Sepia, like sepia color.
Yeah,
you know
everything is sepia. Yeah. The moment you cross the bridge, everything is no color, sepia. Yeah.
Exactly. Like that was my idea. And then as well in 2009, it was the war on drugs. So in Primer Impacto, it would seem like if it was
Drug
a
wars
scene from
everywhere.
Iraq.
Yeah.
Like with the tanks and everything.
Oh my god.
So I was scared. I was really scared, but we did it as like a drive, a road trip. And we came down with two friends of my mom, and they're actually both US citizens. That actually came to help and the end when we reached the border. So we went through the states and everything. We even had a dog. I was going to bring my cat, and my cat, he got frightened, I think, because of all the commotion. And unfortunately, we couldn't wait for him anymore, and I had to leave him. My aunt later went and found him, and she took care of him. But yeah, that's also what gets left behind, you know what I mean, for my family as well. And in my case, I had the fortune, you could say, of being able to come back with my family, being able to kind of plan out a return, maybe not on your terms, but for my mom. Exactly, at least from my parents, you know. So that was also a lot more than many other people have been able to have the opportunity from, no? So we reached Texas. There was a moment that I wasn't even sure if we were already in Mexico or in the United States. And I never knew, as I mentioned to you, no, it's really different from each locality that you are raised in. Texas, there was some part of it that it looked like Mexico, like it looked like Mexico. Everything.
Well, it was Mexico at some point.
Yes. Then I learned. Yeah, it was Mexico at some point. But we crossed over. First, my dad and my siblings in a car, and my mom, my sister, and we crossed on foot with our dog, and because they did the paperwork for the car and stuff like that. And the thing that my mom had feared the most was ever topándose la migra. And we were about to cross over, and there was a border patrol agent that comes over, and my mom's freaking out. She's like, "Oh my gosh, la migra, no?" But at this point, it's like we're going to Mexico. Like, like they're not going to do anything to us. And he asks us what we're doing and where we were going. And well, we were still speaking mostly English, Spanglish at best. And we were like, "We're going to Mexico," and it was so ironic. It was such, I guess, bad humor of the universe that he says, "Don't go to Mexico. It's dangerous." And it's like, I'm like, Mom.
And just for you, you already, with that idea, like, oh God, we're really going to die.
Yeah, there had been a shootout that day. So there had been, there had been a shootout. And not just only that, it's like, Mom, you see, this is a sign from God that we're not supposed to leave the United States, that we're supposed to stay. And no, well, there wasn't anything else we could do because my dad was already on the other side and he didn't have documents. My brothers could come back and meet us up, but my dad couldn't, no? So it was already that between borders already, our family was at that moment. So we crossed over. and you asked how it was. Ironically enough, it felt that shame and that you could say feeling of being in the shadows that I didn't have in the US for the most part of my years because I didn't know of my status. I felt it here because my mom would tell me to not talk. My mom would tell me to try to hide my accent in the sense of just basically don't talk so they won't hear where you're from.
Yeah.
Because it was a border town, because there was a lot of families that were, there was a lot of families. At that moment, I didn't understand until I grew up more and I realized what was what happened, and I asked myself what I had went through. When we reached the aduana, they had a bunch of families like on a ditch, as well as my family, taking out a bunch of stuff because our families came with like trailers of stuff
Right.
because we
Yeah.
didn't know like you could buy these things in Mexico, no?
Yeah.
Nobody was here to tell
Like,
you like
there's Walmart and Sam's Club and Costco in
yeah,
Mexico.
yeah, like we didn't know that. Like my
But
parents were
you don't see that
hauling.
in Sepia. Yeah.
No, you don't. My parents were hauling a dryer, a washer, a lavador, digo, a refri, a flat screen TV.
Oh
Like
my,
you can
yeah.
imagine, and plus there was a lot of things we left behind because the trailer was too heavy. That they were like, no, we had to literally do a pit stop at Aunt's house and leave a bunch of
Just
stuff
stuff.
behind. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Um, so that was there was families with four-wheelers, like we had a four-wheeler too because Florida, but like we left it behind and stuff like that. And you saw the corruption from day one. So they were trying to charge you in dollars. We crossed that day. It was actually Halloween night, and it was going to be the first and the second, Primero y el dos, Dia de Muertos,
Yeah.
and they were going to have the offices closed. So they were kind of threatening, if you guys don't want to be delayed at the border more days, then give
You
us some
gotta
dollars
pay.
so we can expedite the process. Yes.
God. Yeah.
And it was a lot of families that didn't know, that had been out of their country for 10, 20, 30 plus years. And the only people that stood up at that moment were my mom's friends because they were US citizens, because they weren't coming back undocumented. And they basically put their foot down and went Karen on them, you could say nowadays.
Yeah.
Um, but that basically moved on the process. And yes, there was some money involved, but we were not stuck at the border. And we got the green light, because also if you had the red light, you had to stop again, get the checkpoint and everything.
Yeah.
We crossed, and as I mentioned, I couldn't really speak. I didn't see it in sepia, but I did see kids in the street. There was a comment that my brother made. It's like, one, why is everybody brown? And two, they have McDonald's because we saw the arches
Yeah.
from a distance.
It's everywhere. You can't escape that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that comment was everybody brown because we were raised in a very multicultural community.
Hmm.
So that was our day-to-day bread. No, and my mom as well, part of her integrating us, you can say more than assimilation at this point into the United States, was that she would have Chinese friends that she learned how to cook egg rolls with and stuff like that. And just to show you, my quinceañera food was arroz con habichuelas with Publix cake that you can only find in Florida,
Oh wow. Yeah.
frijoles charros, and lechon. So it
It's
was
a
that
little bit of
fusion
everything. Yeah.
with tostones. And instead of, for me, tortilla, it was bread. Like,
Yeah.
bread and butter. So that was my plate that I think showcases like where I was raised in, no? And we arrived to Acayucan, Veracruz is where I'm located. And unfortunately, we passed through the story that many community members also pass, which is you send your money and there's no money when you come back.
Oh my
And
gosh. So your
yeah,
parents were sending money
yeah,
regularly to
into
build
account. Yeah,
a house and
yeah,
eventually retire, and there's none.
yeah. So the plan was that they were going to find money in their bank account. They had bought land. There was a small construction that was like a little store.
Yeah.
And then from that money, we were going to build a house. They had told us that we were going to have that pool we always wanted. They were going to set up their cyber cafe, and we were going to basically be able to enjoy them more as well, because they were going to basically be able to retire. That didn't happen. They had 4 kids, all going to school, in middle school, high school, middle school, and elementary school, now in Mexico, facing culture shock and whatever else that brings along. So that was really, really hard.
And it's one of those realities that we keep hearing, people sending money back home for years, decades in some instances, and then they get that shock that like, oh, it's it's not there. What happened to that money? It's like, where did it go? And like, who took it? And there's no accountability. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that I just can't even fathom. And that's family. That's supposed to be family.
And then you add on those dynamics that it's family. So how can you really claim accountability when it's maybe your mom, when it's maybe your brother, et cetera, et cetera. So that is something that a lot of people face. And unfortunately, that was part of our story now. And well, in my dad's case, he had a landscaping company in the United States. He was actually able to work, you could say, for the municipality. And within that kind of bring in some funds. Before they left to the United States, they actually were missionaries. They were Christian missionaries. So my dad, he bumped into one of his friends from back in the day, and he decided he wanted to go back and be a pastor. So now it was not only being a returnee family, it was also now being a pastoral family, which I had no idea what that meant.
What that meant, yeah.
So that was another curveball that was thrown. And well, we basically struggled in the first months to be able to be accepted into school. So we were denied education. We had to face the bureaucratic process of Mexico. In my mom's case, as I mentioned, she tried to plan a return. So she went to Orlando to the consulate, and we got our paperwork revalidated, et cetera, et cetera. What they tell you that you need to be able to come back. I think we were actually the first family that was really going through this in this location of Mexico.
So they didn't even know what to do. The bureaucrats are like,
exactly.
They're trying to do this linear, and you come with something different. Like, I have no idea what am I supposed to even think.
That's exactly how they responded. But as well, once again, Mexico works in other ways. So it was much easier to be able to get my brothers in school. In elementary school, it wasn't so much of a problem. Middle school, yes, after a couple of months, my sister was finally able to get in. And in my case, my dad actually requested a letter from the presidency, la presidencia del municipio. And she extended me a letter, basically asking politely the high school if they could allow me ingreso, that I had this paperwork, that I was coming from another location, et cetera, et cetera. And from one day to another, I was basically with a uniform and a schedule on hand. So that shows you how the system can work as well.
Oh my God, yeah. It's like the system of influence and yeah.
Yes, of la palanca.
La palanca. That's right. Yeah, that's some money and palanca.
Of la palanca.
Wow, what a story.
So that's how I was able to go. Yeah.
So you started getting, and again, that shock coming to, and we talk about this precisely with Marcela, because I know how racist we can be. I'm from the city. So I know exactly how, I'm going to tell you, shitty we can be. With I've seen it, and it's just like, oh my gosh, I just can't even imagine, what kind of cultural experience, you have to go through to try to get assimilated into this new community.
So I didn't know Mexico was racist and classist. I guess I came from this innocence as well of really understanding and growing up in Mexico. I started to understand what was social justice as well. I started to understand what luchas meant. I started to understand what Mexico has lived as well, no? At that moment, first of all, I was meeting a lot of family for the first time. In the United States, I had always felt out of place in the sense of my skin color. because I was raised in a lot of white schools. And one of the things that made me stand out was particularly my skin color. And when I had this, you could say, I don't like the word hatred, but I had a dislike like for the physique of my body even, no? Nowadays, like being thick or whatever is a lot more in style. But back in the day, you're coming from an early 2000 uprising of seeing the
In
girls in the
Florida.
magazine in
Yeah.
Florida, et cetera, no? And when I went back to Chiapas for the first time, I thought my hips were big. Their hips are huge. I saw their smile, and that smile that they would always tell me about me, I saw it in them. And for the first time, I was able to see other people that really looked like me. And that made me feel like, wow. So within that struggle of facing the culture shock, at the same time, I was realizing that there was this whole other world outside of the United States, a whole other world that I had not been able to see because I was only able to live on the other side. Only
Yeah.
able to in the sense of like I felt that reference to being caged in, no? I
Right.
didn't understand I was caged in. I didn't understand
Wow. That is.
I wasn't able to, or that I had been stolen or taken away the opportunity to see this whole other side of me that explains so much of who I am. So it was that dual process that I think much further on in my process, I was able to really sit down and understand. But at that moment, it was more the sense of anger, of wanting to go back, of reclamos towards our parents, of why they even went over there if at the end of the day we came back. But then I had to understand that it wasn't so much of an individual or of my family's story, but it was this collective story. And it had roots to it, had roots to a system, to experiences, to dynamics, no? And so I had to confront that racism and classism, as you mentioned. But while I was living here, there were so many people that looked like me surrounding here, just literally like 10-15 minutes away. Acayucan was actually part of Voluta, and that's where they say the Malinche was born in.
Okay.
So I'm surrounded by indigenous communities. I used to give English class to students when I was in high school that spoke Popoluca and Nahuatl. So I was in a community that was in between. In my case, my abuela only speaks Chinanteco. She's forgetting her Spanish. She's going through Alzheimer's, so she's forgetting her Spanish. So now she only speaks Chinanteco. On my dad's side, they're Zapotecos. So I didn't realize that my facciones were indigenous. I didn't realize that that's why even like I had certain tones or the hair that you can see in everybody, no? But at the same time, there was distinctiveness within me that I didn't realize came from an indigenous background, no? Or what that meant for me. And I was sharing with a friend because within the deported and returned community as well, that it was that realization that we haven't been so close to our indigenous communities because versus versus other immigrants that can be very proud of their immigrant story, we were sharing this reflection that within our communities, my mom didn't tell us about our immigrant story. My mom didn't tell us about our family because it was something that she wanted to maybe hush down to give space for another evolution, no? Of who we are in this 21st century.
But we hear that a lot of
world.
immigrant families, that come to the States. Like, no, I honestly thought that was a thing of the past because I heard in my generation, I'm much older than you, and I had friends in Texas where I went to school that was like, yeah, no, I don't speak Spanish because my parents didn't raise us speaking Spanish, and and they're like, yeah, that was a mistake, but it was the thing back then. It's like, no, you gotta assimilate, you gotta there's we're not going to give you burritos, tacos. No, you gotta assimilate and try to be American. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was just a thing, but I honestly don't understand. But obviously, it's a different circumstance. You are trying to, as a parent, number one, the best for your kids. Oh, did we lose you, Leni? Oh, there we are. So you're trying everything, to nobody gives us a manual to how to be a parent. You just try to do it as best. And in some instances, you can throw like, well, what I did, that was the wrong thing. But and you're learning on the go, on the fly.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. And in the case of coming back here, and also my parents realizing the parenting styles, now that you raised that I have some dogs barking around there.
That's part of being in Mexico. El perro en la azotea.
Yeah, we have 3 strays that have now been now are part of the family as well. But yeah, in that case as well of being now in cercanía with my primos, et cetera, my mom, she still tried to keep up that English with us as well. That within my siblings, I lost a lot of books. That was one of the boxes that we left at my aunt's, and I didn't realize. But the little bit of books that we had and stuff, we would read them and reread them again and reread them, or Google, et cetera. No, at least fortunately now we had these tools that were able to give us access to a whole world, you could say. But in those first months of my parents realizing what was going on, what were they confronting now, how are they going to raise a family, well, we were trying to not crumble, you could say. I think from one side it united us more as a family, because we left a world where we each had our own room, or at least shared a room, but with space, commodities. Each one had maybe either their laptop or tech gadget, and now we had to speak with each other. We were now in un cuarto that had a floor that was dirt, sharing 2 beds for a family of 6 that had been used to each one having their own bed, sharing 1 bathroom. And I say this in the sense of like, this is my story, because I also know when people hear, they get frightened of coming back. This is my story. And a lot of other people have had different stories. But at the same time, what flourished from there for me was a realization of the materialistic world that I had been in. And that's something that I still go back to when I go back in the US. I hadn't felt my family so united until that moment. And it's always what comes out, what flourishes from those moments, but at the same time, the reality that we were living, no?
Absolutely.
And the consequences that borders create for our families. But that was something that as a family, I realized. And but at the same time, we were still going through depression. At the same time, we were still going through homesickness. And as my mom says, that we would be, I don't remember this, but she says that she would serve us on the table and we would be crying. And she says that we wouldn't even want to pick up the spoon, and that we would be begging her to go back. I don't remember this, but
really, that was your trauma.
Yeah. That we wouldn't get off of the bed and we would be replaying Jackie Chan movies. We love like Jackie Chan, and we have I still have it, the whole DVD. It was, I think it was like a case or something like that.
Jackie Chan movies,
Angels, all of those movies. And those were the first months, maybe year or 2, that we lived in Mexico. And it wasn't going to school helped. It helped for me. I also once again felt this liberty that I didn't know I didn't have, or this way of doing life as well. So I actually went to high school, but I went to the turno de la tarde. So I was my last class would finish till like 9 o'clock at night.
Oh, wow.
And and if the teacher didn't come, or before that, or in between, we would go to the park. We would get el elote. You know what?
Ooh, I was like, yes.
Yeah, there's actually an esquitero here that was like on national television, so we have very good esquites.
Love esquites. I love esquites.
Yes. He has a special crema that he makes at home, his special ingredients. Yes. So if you're ever down here, for sure we'll take you for some esquite.
Absolutely. Yeah, esquites is for life. Yeah.
Yes. But I also started to feel this freedom, this other side of me that I didn't know was that I had within me as well. I started to explore more, and I carried on my curiosity. So I graduated from a Mexican high school, which facilitated a lot for me to be able to apply to a university here.
Okay.
But at the same time, I still didn't have a strong Spanish. So when I arrived to high school, they thought I was just going to pick up a pencil and write in Spanish, no? And questioning why you don't maybe write or read in
Right.
Spanish. I, out of my four siblings, was the one that actually knew the most Spanish, because once again, that narrative of the immigrant family, I was always the translator of of my family.
Okay.
My dad had a landscaping company. That's something that Marcela luego told me that she liked in my profile, was that since I was 8, I was helping my dad in doing cotizaciones and doing contracts for clients that he had for landscaping. So I already had a certain dominance in that end, but I didn't have it in Spanish. And that was another obstacle that we had to overface. But because of that
Little experience that you had. Yeah.
yeah, my Spanish was a lot better. I also took Spanish for Spanish speakers. When my mom told me that we were going to come back, I was like, "You're crazy." But in the back of my head I was just like, just in case. I was like, just in case. So I wanted to sign on for like French or like another language, you know what I mean? Because I'm like Spanish, well, I could like en la casa, no?
Uh-huh.
But I chose that because I was like, just in case. I realized I spoke more Spanglish than Spanish here. And then as well, being raised in Florida, it's a lot more Caribbean Spanish. It's a lot
Yeah.
more like Puerto Rican, Cuban influence.
Cuban, Venezuelan, Colombian mixture. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I couldn't say my R's. I had a Puerto Rican accent. I was raised in a Puerto Rican church. And the Spanish that I knew how to read was actually because my mom gave me a bilingual Bible. So I
Okay.
would read in English and I would start to try to decipher how you would pronounce in Spanish.
I see.
So that's the level of Spanish I had, just to like show you. And in the United States, I wanted to be a neonatal nurse. I was even in a
Okay.
program called Health Occupation Students of America. I was like, that was the path that I felt that I wanted to walk on. And here you have to apply for an exam to be accepted to a university.
Yeah.
And there's only a certain amount of spaces.
Yeah,
Here,
because and you know what funny? Last night I was, having conversation with friends, and I'm going to say, look, education is free in Mexico, but you have to earn it. I mean, there's certain
yeah,
spots in the national state universities. It's completely free. I mean, you pay nominal. It's like ridiculously what you pay, but you have an admissions test, and it's not easy, and there's only
mhm.
limited amount of space. So obviously, they take the top. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. So here you hear of people that are studying since middle school because
Yeah.
they know they want to be a doctor and they have private tutors if they can afford it, or they sell you those booklets that you're supposed to study on. I bought the booklet and it came with the
Right.
CD back in the day. And you would have like pop quizzes and things like that to kind of train, because it was also timed, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to be a lot more smart about how what I was going to choose if I wanted to have the possibility to enter university here. Um, when we were coming back, my mom told me that we were coming back as well because she didn't want to see my sister or I flipping burgers. You know,
Right.
the usual thing that they say. My mom, she worked in restaurants over there, and she's like, there, the reason we came here was to give you guys a better future. At that moment, DACA wasn't in existence.
Okay.
We were actually living through now once again being able to study about my community more. We were living in one of the years that there was more mass deportation from the United States to Mexico in ever in history. And there was even talks about a net zero within our countries, where there was the amount of immigrants that were coming from Mexico to the amount of immigrants that were leaving the
Back and
United
back.
States
Yeah.
exactly got to what some people called it, a net zero of flow. So
Okay.
that
Yeah.
was the context that I was also coming back in. And in my case, I actually decided to apply for business. I didn't I knew that wasn't my dream, but I wanted to continue to hold on and give that continuation to that dream of going to university on this side. Me aferré a la idea that I was going to still go to university, that I was going to be working my part-time job, and I was going to do life. No, I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if I was able to reach it, but I knew if I wanted to have the most closest opportunity to it was that I couldn't be a nurse. I was never going to reach a level of acceptance.
Right.
And I started to investigate university exams. And La Universidad Veracruzana is of the few universities in Mexico versus La UNAM. It has a lot of Mexican history in it, and especially depends on what career you want.
Right.
But in La Universidad Veracruzana, they had more of a general exam. And in that, they even had like a tech space. They had it was like logic and reasoning, more focused into it. I was like, I think I could have more opportunity there. So as I mentioned, I didn't have Mexican history in their exam. So I'm like, okay, at least that will be one portion of the exam. I know I won't flunk. And yeah, they did have like a writing and Spanish portion, but it was a lot more like, okay, maybe just trying to figure out. I still don't know how to use tildes and things like that. Even after 12 years, I still don't.
Well, you know what, gauging from commentators on Facebook and posts, like 99% of the population don't either anymore. So I think you're good.
Know, right? I know, right? So I decided to apply for international business administration. Yeah, international business administration. I was like, I already have the English business.
Yeah.
And well, I do like being in spaces of negotiation when I would be with my dad. I would get a bit of thrill being in those spaces. So I was like, let me go for that. And I hated it.
Oh,
I knew
really?
But I hated it because I would hear, and this is where my anger started to get triggered again, because I would hear a lot about open borders, and I would hear about export and import.
Oh, I see. The liberalization of the trade.
Yeah. But I was like, we're the humans. I was like,
you're right. We talk only about products and services, but we never talk about, and it's part of the NAFTA, and now the whatever it's called now, the TMAC. It's left always behind. Like, let's open up the border except for people, labor, which is one of the one of the inputs for production.
Exactly. And I just couldn't understand. And then also that's where I started to see it as well, classism, for the first time. So my university, the majority of the people, not everybody, but you could identify people that had a certain upbringing or opportunities. I realized it when first I stood out once again, as I always have. In high school, I was called La Gringa. And here I wasn't called La Gringa, but I did stand out because I was in the United States, no? Yeah. And I remember we were talking, and there was this girl that said, oh, I went to Disney, because I mentioned Florida. And she's like, oh, I went to Disney, I went to here, etc., etc. It was so beautiful. And in my head, I was like, I was there too, but I was there undocumented. And that's when I started to feel shame as well, which once again, I didn't feel that when I was over there. I felt it maybe at the very end when I realized my status. Right. I left without telling anybody goodbye, really, because the only person I told, turns out my friend was undocumented too. Yeah. So I was starting to feel those emotions come on that I didn't have the time to process back then. But now I was living on my own. I was working part-time in a Walmart as a cashier. I was doing what I said I was going to do. Yeah. But I was starting to have all of these emotional waves come on. And I just felt a sense of loneliness as much of my community does, they feel like they're the only ones going through this process of what did I go through? Once again, why did my parents do this? And I had the fortune to have a teacher that guided me a bit to understand more the history of Mexico. And my maestra Gordillo, she gave us an economics theory class, like international theories. And I was learning about like Adam Smith, or what was his name, or something like that. The la distribución y no sé qué, la producción. And I realized, as you mentioned, NAFTA came at a time. I was born in 1994. My parents,
The year of
they
NAFTA
were
signing. Yeah.
exactly the year
No,
of
not
NAFTA
signing,
signing.
enacted. It was signed in 1987, I believe, 1988, and it was enacted and it began into force in 1994.
Exactly. La banca cayó.
Yeah.
Nuestro peso se devaluó. My parents had a debt because in my first year of birth, I got very sick. And because there was no local access to medical services, my parents had to hospitalize me in a private hospital. They say basically it saved my life, and that hospital's still there. The doctor's still there. I've been wanting to go and meet him and add that part of understanding to my story. But because of that, they had a debt that from one night to another inflated as so many families. Exactly. And that was the main reason my parents actually had to go to the US. And I started to understand all of that. And I had a reflection within me of first agradecimiento to my parents, first understanding that it wasn't their fault and it wasn't my fault.
Right.
And I wasn't the only family that was going through this. So at that time that all of these emotions and questions were popping in my head, I was running one day from Walmart to my faculty, and there was a guy that stopped me in the middle of that walk. There was a car wash, and I was speaking with my mom on the phone in English. And he stopped me and he asked me where I was from. And it's
in English.
Still. Yeah. It's still Veracruz. So you want to be safe. And I'm like, well, I learned it in school. And he was like, no. Where are you from? And I paused and I really saw him. And he had tattoos. The way that he was dressing, I know wasn't local.
Yeah.
And from that, like, he basically just like he just told me his story, that he's from Chicago. He arrived when he was 1. He passed the stop sign. They stopped him, they deported him, and after like 25 years he was living with an aunt that he has no idea who she is, and that he is here working at this car wash. And he was just this look in his eyes like, I found somebody else like me.
Yeah.
It sparked that in me. And as I say, and within our own community, we reflect that. And I think in so many communities, no, it depends on what your emotional state of what you can give or cannot. And at that moment, and unfortunately, I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know how to give or to be able to hold the space for him and I. So I just left, and since then, I've never seen him. I tried to go back. I even asked around for him and stuff, and the last thing I heard was that he was studying on Saturdays in another school that was from the
Okay.
At that point I was in Jalapa, Veracruz, so that's the capital of Veracruz. And with that teacher, I told her my experience, and she's like, Leni, have you ever heard of humanities? And I started to Google it, and in the Universidad Veracruzana, in the part that I was from, they had La Facultad de Humanidades, and it was the biggest one.
Social sciences, yeah.
Exactly. And I applied for social anthropology. That was mind-opening. Before that, I started to get a taste of humanities, because I saw that there was a recolecta for las patronas, which are based in Córdoba. They're the women that throw food on the trains, on La Bestia.
Oh,
for
okay.
immigrants to pass. Back in the day as well, the migration routes were a lot different than from what they are today. Back in the day, people were basically able to take even from Guatemala or as early as Chiapas and Mexico all the way to the north.
Okay.
Our local immigration started to get a lot more aggressive and violate human rights. There was a lot more people that were falling from the trains and losing a
Limb.
foot, a
Yeah.
limb,
Or
etc.,
life.
etc.
Yeah.
Exactly. At that point, a lot of the violence that had been lived in Mexico within locals, they had been sucked of money. So people were poorer to start with. And who's now going to give us money? Los familiares de Estados Unidos.
Right.
So los secuestran, you call up el tío, you call up the mom that's in Florida, that's in California, mándame esto, tengo a
And
tu
now it's just
hijo,
organized crime
etc.
moved in. Yeah.
Exactly. So because of that, that shifted. But during that time, there was an uprising of immigrants' rights in Mexico, and Veracruz was a punto rojo. So that was the first cercanía that I had to a lucha migrante. It was actually with the Central American community.
Okay.
And at that time as well, there was a lot of shifts going on in Mexico. Ayotzinapa happened. That was the first protest that I went to. And I went to that protest with my teacher of almost like 70 something years old, walked in the rain, just flooded the streets. And for the first time, I felt what that meant to have citizenship. I know anybody can protest. I
Right.
also know, I think in our constitution, we have like extranjeros no pueden participar or como
You can, yeah,
algo así.
unorganized. Yeah.
Yeah, algo así, ¿no?
Yeah.
For the first time, that word citizenship hit me. I don't believe in state in the sense of like the division because of borders, but I understood what that lack of citizenship felt for maybe my parents over there of not
Right.
having a piece. And
Your
here,
rights and your obligations, because
exactly.
one of the difference that I see in the two systems, here you have rights, but I don't see that many obligations. In Mexico, you do have obligations like voting. It's an obligation. It's not only a right. That's your civilian duty. Send your kids to school. It's your obligation to send them to school up to certain scholarity.
Exactly. Exactly. And for the first time that happened, and I just had a moment of flashback to everything that happened, and at the same time a spark. I always call it como esa llamita. Esa llamita dentro de mí, but that realized that llamita was towards the system, was towards borders, was towards who, what, no? It wasn't no longer just esparcida por cualquier lado, no? Sino que I felt to like come together in fusion and understand this is my lucha. And that took me a whole path. Para no ser más de larga, I basically entered anthropology the first day of class. My maestra Betty, que en paz descanse, she passed away a couple of years ago, but she also left me a lot of enseñanza, was, ¿cuál es tu propósito? Un antropólogo, una antropóloga está aquí para investigar, está aquí para aportar. And ¿qué vas a aportar y a quién? In this case, I was like, I was raised and documented. I had never spoken it out, like verbally in my life till that moment. I was raised and documented, and I was here to find my community and support it, basically. That took me on a path of being identified within Universidad as the girl. If you want to talk about returnees, if you want to talk about migration, go with Leni. That led me to meet another investigator, that led us to win a national prize, talk within the university with Rectoría, yes, about what is going on, about entrance exams with people that are coming back, how do we make it easier, how are we blocking this talent from accessing our schools, etc., etc. Now, once again, bureaucracy was much done. I don't know, but I know much was said, and I know for sure they know we are there, and I know at least within our group, we have been organizing. And that led me to meet Jill in a book presentation of Los Otros Dreamers, what was called at that time. And she told me I was like fangirling, first of all, because that book holds 26, 27 stories of returnees and deportees, like I said, that was written at a time that nobody was speaking about us. It's
What's the
written
name
in
of the
English
book
and
again? So
Spanish.
we can.
Los otros, les, now it's with an X.
Oh,
That
Les
ajá,
Otros,
les otros dreamers.
Les Otros
Así.
Dreamers. Okay.
Les otros dreamers. It is on sale. You guys can get it physically in the United States or digitally as well. And it shared the story of 26 returnees and deportees, as I mentioned, written in English, Spanish, or also if they have an indigenous language, it was also translated into their indigenous language.
Okay.
Yes. And it exemplifies the diversity that we have in our community and so many points of entrances for stories of who is a returnee and who is a deportee. I recommend it always, if anybody wants to know more about our community, it's the way to go. As I'm sharing my story, it shares that story of so many people concentrated in that book. We also have a website, and you can find part of my story in there, and you can find other community members. I always call it's the virtual pages of Les Otros Dreamers, because the story continues. The community
Absolutely.
still growing. The stories are still relevant because they're still happening. So as well, if there and as well, we've opened up the who is our community. We call ourselves de aquí de allá. So our community is also nuestra comunidad indocumentada ya, que sigue luchando, because we don't believe que our lucha ends once on being this side of the border. Now we have a lucha for family reunification and a pathway to be able to go back to our hometowns that we live exiled from, but we unite our voices as well.
Right.
We are in collaboration with organizations over there, and if there's maybe a protest, we'll maybe hold a protest here in solidarity with detainees, etc., no?
Right.
But that led me to my first protest with my community. Jill told me that on May Day, there was going to be a protest afuera de la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores. And excuse me. And I didn't have, at that point, I had quit my job because I was studying both business and anthropology. And I asked my mom, I feel like corazonada. I feel like I have to be there. I've been looking for my people, basically, and she has always supported me. Unfortunately, she gave me for my bus ticket. It was the first time I was going to be in Mexico City. Así se me hacía siempre como enorme, no? Because it's one of the biggest cities like in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. And I would always see like the sky. I was raised once again in Florida, smaller towns, no skyscrapers, nothing like that.
Right.
And I arrived to Jill's house, and that day that I arrived, that night, Maggie arrived, and she had actually arrived from Georgia, because through that book tour, her story is part of the book. She actually was able, one of the things that we really advocate for is visa justice. How can we use our platforms to be able to get invited to universities, be able to get invited as guest speakers in organizations, et cetera, et cetera. We get these letters, we go to the embassy, we present it, and we say, hey, we're applying for a visa. Why? Because we're getting letters from Berkeley University inviting us to do a conversation in their forum.
Presentation, yeah.
Exactly. And that's exactly how it happened with Maggie, and that's how it happened with me as well. And she was coming back and she was sharing with me her experience. I opened up my computer. We now have a podcast called Bocha Sowa as well. If you guys want to find out more, you guys can also hear us through there, because our community is sharing their stories and they're creating art as well. I opened up a page and I told her these are ideas that I've had of starting a YouTube channel, or maybe like how can we support people on this side, or Bocha 101, no? I call myself a Bocha. And we started to have these conversations, and at that time, Marce was walking around and trying to find people to give her interviews and find out more about our community. And I told them at that time, my brothers had decided to go back to the US. So we were now becoming a family, a separated family. My brothers, they were still underage. They were like maybe 13 and 15. And at that point, my mom asked me if I could stop basically studying in the sense of maybe focus more on working now. And
Okay.
well, I couldn't say no to that. So I told them that I was now thinking of maybe looking for a job. When I arrived to the city, we had that protest. We came together, the group that you could say was like the first group that really organized in the sense of protest, et cetera, et cetera. And there was like 2, 3 organizations flourishing for the first time of returnees and deportees. And it was this momentum that you could feel that was going on within our movement that I was like, I need to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I told them that I was looking for a job, that I had studied business, but I also was in social anthropology, that was what I loved most. And they tell me, well, hey, there's at that point, it was actually called Code School before it was called Hola Code.
Hola Code.
Yeah. And I have a call with Marce and et cetera, et cetera. Once again, to cut it short, in less than a month, I was in the city with a job in Hola Code, where it still didn't have funding, and they were like, maybe by September we won't have a job, so let's pitch. And that's where I joined Marce in pitching, and we were able to get our
Launch it
first,
and yeah.
exactly, seed capital.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah.
a fantastic. That's how the circle completes. Yeah.
Yes. Once I also, as her, I had to leave the space as well, took that decision. And I'm currently now part of the team of Oda, Otros Dreams in Accion. I'm still continuing with La Comunidad. I am part of the team of Bocha House, which is the cultural center of Oda. We're located in La Roma, in la Ciudad de México.
Next
Yeah.
time I'm over there, I'll come and visit.
For sure, for sure. And that's basically how it's been like full circle. I'm still seeing what other projects I want to start. I don't know. Yeah.
My goodness, that's a great story. And again, super eye-opening, what's happening, with the immigrant communities, more specifically, the ones that are deported or decide to go back. Again, just the cultural assimilation, the shock, and what to do next, how to adjust to a new reality, I would say. But it's just fantastic, and to me, it just also presents a world of opportunities. What can we do with that talent? I mean, that talent that's it's out there in Mexico, maybe or maybe not, is underutilized, and now with the with the technology tools, how can we erase the borders that separate us? But that's a question that I'll leave out there.
Yeah, and there is a lot of, I realized that there are opportunities in Mexico. That's something that I didn't realize. But at the same time, I realized that I am launching or starting from a different point that my parents had. So when my parents share their stories of we didn't have opportunities, I believe them, because I still see communities and I still see part of our population that is going through that still. It's hard to be able to see that when we come back, a lot of our communities or a lot of where our parents come from, they're still in that flow. But at the same time, I think there has been evolutions and there has been growth and et cetera, no? For our returned and deported community, as I'm sure you talked with Marce, one of the things that was flourishing more were call centers. And that's something that, is that all we're good for? No. If we have people that over there, like my dad, that didn't know English, was able to start a landscaping company in a country
and be successful.
Exactly, because he was successful. But here in his country, it's hard for a person to be able to start a startup, for somebody to be able to be called an entrepreneur, for somebody to be able to open up a startup. Either you have to have seed capital that comes usually from a certain population in Mexico that is a 1%, or you have to be able to have esa oportunidad de decir que quieres emprender, en el sentido de you have a way, either a certain comfort to be able to do it from. And I think that is where our community sometimes faces a lot of walls. In the sense of
Absolutely.
here in Mexico, just saying I want to, yeah, of course you can. Like if you want to start up your taqueria, whatever, no? But maybe as well, like we want to start getting into opening up startups or founding spaces. How do we do that? No, I always question even myself. Would it have been as easy for me to just go and advocate for my community by myself? And in this case, it was, of course, alongside Marce Super Chingona. It was alongside a team. It was in this context that I knew what to say, in the sense of like, I knew, even when I got my visa, I always say I knew the narrative they wanted to hear. And here
Yeah,
it's the same. No, you're pitching at the end of the day.
absolutely.
I had that background, but I don't know if if just going in and whatever and just saying you will be able to obtain. No, I think there's a lot of community that has so many great ideas, and I personally I'm like I would love a space where I can go and just, how do you launch this here? Because maybe it was much easier for me to say, okay, I want to do something in the United States, and let's do it. No, figure it out. Like
Yeah,
once again, learn how to navigate starting something over there. But how do you launch it here? How do you survive in this market?
right. And that's the question that I want to leave it to. It's like, how can you apply what you that knowledge that you acquired, and that not only knowledge through school, but through experiences? And like, I lived in the US, so how can I apply that here? What can I do cross-border, and how can I utilize technology to make X, Y, or Z? That's why I want to leave this. What I would like, if we're able to crack that code, I think we're going to be unlocking
Yeah.
a wealth of opportunity for this community. That
Se me fue la palabra, but how do you call it? Those centers where you take an idea, they work it with you, and then launch it.
the
Uh,
the uh,
accelerators, no,
accelerators, incubator. Yeah,
incubators.
yeah.
I think that would be a great idea. And I think there have been I've read intentions, but I have never like really seen or like seen with my own eyes something tangible that is being done precisely. I think we have a community that is both bilingual
Yeah,
or getting to it, because or even
exactly.
trilingual, multilingual or multilingual, because we also once again have community that was bilingual already when they arrived to the United
I'm
States, because they have
bicultural.
traditions.
Bicultural,
Exactly, or
which is
multi.
different. Yeah, because you could be
Yeah.
bilingual even in Mexico. I grew up. I mean, I went to school and I was bilingual, but that's a difference. The way you learn how to speak and the way you live here. That's a completely
Yeah.
different thing, and that applies to marketing. That applies to a bunch of Again, if we're able to crack that code, like, oh my gosh, I have all this information that nobody else
Yeah.
has, and all the skills that I acquire through living in the U. Just by living, just by being here and growing up here
Yeah.
in the States, in different, whatever you grow, Florida, California, Oregon, if you're only able to just like really, put everything apart, just like desmenuzar todo como pollito para
Yeah.
enchilada, and it's like, if I shred this, like I can make a tinga, like, then we're gonna be
Yummy.
unlocking a lot of potential. Yeah,
Yeah. And also with community that has already been living here.
absolutely.
I think
Yeah,
that's something that our own community wants to give back a lot. And within Ola, we talk a lot about as well what are other ways of thinking business plans. One of them is cooperativas.
okay.
We're very community centered. We're very, I think if one of the things that we identify is maybe allá era como mucho por ti mismo, ¿no? Y que está bien, ¿no? But
Sí.
as well, what are other ways of doing things here? When maybe you as an individual no tienes todas las oportunidades, or maybe you don't have everything you need to launch something, but you can juntarte con el amigo, or you can
Yeah,
juntarte with this guy that knows a lot about this, but I have the notions of technology. No, I'm a web programmer, but I have maybe the idea, et cetera, and how do we come together? And maybe el capital, rethinking of it, not just only being money, no?
absolutely.
¿Qué más significa capital?
Like resources. Yeah.
Exactly. What else is counted as resources to be able to bring in together and do esa tinga, ¿no?
Yeah.
Make algo rico
Make algo
de
rico así, yeah, de pollito
Ujú.
desmenuzado.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lenny, this has been fantastic. I think we're gonna have to split this show in 2 episodes because it's so
Ah,
long. Yeah, but it's so great to have you, and I would love to have you back. At some point. This is the door is always open for our guests to come back.
thank you.
We'll always love to listen to the
I'm
stories.
I'm right now thinking of maybe something I want to explore with mermaiding. I just got myself a mermaid tail. I'll send you a little video.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
things that I can launch through there as well with La Niñez and particularly Latina girls navigating borders and who we are. And
Totally. And you know what? One of the things you should, I don't know if you know Encantos Media,
no,
Stephen Wolf Pereira, just look him up. I mean, what they do, and I know other publishers too, they do children's book telling this kind of stories.
I've been wanting to.
I mean, please do, because that's truly inspiring. I mean, you can, this is something that you can connect on both sides of the border,
Exactly.
and those narratives in Spanglish, being able to put that story into.
Have you been in Tijuana?
I've never been to Tijuana, but I've been to other border towns, El Paso,
Okay,
Nuevo
so
Laredo.
What's unique about Tijuana is that the border wall goes all the way into the ocean.
I have seen it on. I have seen it. Yeah, it goes like.
Siempre es como, ¿será que el pescadito nada entre la frontera, no? So, wanting to bring that story as well with mermaiding. But yes, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, check them out, and I think it'll be a great idea. I mean, just an illustrated book that was like, oh my gosh, I can give this to my kids. I can give this to friends. People can share and identify with that struggle. Not the struggle, but with the narrative, the story.
Yeah.
Well, Leni, un placer, muchísimas gracias. Que pases muy felices fiestas.
Igualmente.
Saludos a todos en México y ojalá nos podamos conocer en México muy pronto. Muchísimas gracias a todos por escuchar. Nos vemos la próxima semana.
Adiós.